Alright folks, welcome. It's kind of crazy. I know that everybody's kind of hunkered down at home, and everybody's trying to do this whole learning remotely thing. So I hope everybody's doing well. I hope you guys are all safe and sound at home. I hope your families are doing well, and I hope that this isn't affecting anybody too terribly. But this is going to be the first attempt at what I hope is a few attempts at trying to do some of the PowerPoints that we have for class and some note-taking that goes with it via Google Classroom. So if this works for you, great. I'm going to have these videos posted to some online place, probably like a YouTube channel for the class or something, so that you can access these links whenever you need. And we'll go from there. All right, so this, if you're logged into Google Classroom, this is the PowerPoint U.S. Imperialism in the Pacific, obviously, and I'm just pretty much going through like I would in a normal class setting, and the expectation for you guys is that having some audio that sort of goes along with the PowerPoint will help you in terms of taking some notes and filling in the note guide, okay? Alright, so let's get rolling. So we've been talking about imperialism, at least we did before you guys left. We know that imperialism is this idea that a country is going to colonize or create some sort of an empire outside of its original borders. And in the past, we talked for a minute about the Monroe Doctrine. So, again, made by James Monroe, this is a doctrine that basically says that Europe has to keep out of the Western Hemisphere. Right, so anything North America, Central America, South America, courtesy of James Monroe, the U.S. says, look, you can't come and create colonies here. You need to stay on your side of the planet, do your own thing. So naturally, the first place that we're going to start looking is going to be in the Western Hemisphere to actually make those colonies, right? So where your note guide picks up, we start with Alaska, and we've talked about Alaska for a little bit already, but you can kind of see it up here. It's this little red chunk, otherwise known as Canada's tail. Haha. And then here's your continental United States. Well, it gets purchased by the Secretary of State, William Seward. All right, he's the Secretary of State back in the 1860s, and he buys Alaska for $7.2 million. So a lot of people at the time think that that's a really stupid idea. They don't think that that's a very good use of money. They call it Seward's folly, because a lot of people thought, what are you doing that for? There's really no point in buying Alaska. There's nothing up there. Why would you do that? However, later on, we figure out that there's a ton of gold and a ton of oil that are in Alaska, and people start rethinking their ideas. They start to go, well, maybe William Seward wasn't so crazy for wanting to buy a place like Alaska, even though he got ridiculed for it, and it earns the nickname Seward's Folly. Eventually people go, well, you know what, maybe that wasn't such a bad idea. Then later on becomes a state in 1959. Hawaii, again, we talked about this a little bit before we left in the original intro to imperialism, but I don't want you guys to think that during the imperialistic period that this is the first time that we've ever set foot on Hawaii. We've actually been there, like this says, since the 1820s. We get there and we kind of start mucking things up in terms of the power that's already there. We sort of start screwing things up in terms of basically telling the Queen, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that. We start making some changes in terms of the laws that are practiced by the native Hawaiians, and slowly but surely we start doing things that we think are helpful, like creating an alphabet, building schools, but that are really stripping them of their traditional Hawaiian culture in a way that they don't really love. So eventually we start using them more as a place to refuel ships and to trade, and Hawaii becomes what's known as the crossroads of the Pacific. So in the future, if you're ever thinking, what kind of a nickname does Hawaii have? It is the crossroads of the Pacific. And they call it that because as you can see, it gives you basically the central hub between the US and China, where everybody wants to trade, or it gives you, I mean, all kinds of different places to go and trade, because it's like the central station for ships to go and send things. Some reasons why we would want Hawaii. You're probably thinking, because I can go there and water ski and drink pineapple juice and have lots of fun. That just happens to be like a fun little bonus for us in terms of Hawaii. What we really want with Hawaii is we want to start using their awesome climate to keep creating sugar, to keep making sugar and distributing sugar. We want to, like I said before, use that crossroads of the Pacific idea to control shipping lanes. We want it as a place, especially during the Spanish-American War, we're going to use Hawaii as a great place to be our refuel station, our gas station. So by the 1890s, right on the precipice of us going to war with Spain over in Cuba to try and gain independence for Cuba, we are going to annex Hawaii, right? And to annex something means that you don't necessarily buy it. They don't necessarily give it to us. We just sort of, we force our way in. We kind of take it without really asking permission. And we sort of tell them, hey, you're a part of the United States now. So not exactly the best look for the United States, but overall it's something that we can't sort of gloss over. It's that plus Alaska become the 49th and 50th states at that point, later in the 1950s, not by 1959. But yeah, we annex Hawaii. And you can see here in this cartoon that this is supposed to be, it actually says Senate right here, but it's supposed to be the U.S. Congress. And you can see that we're chilling here in North America, and now we've got our hands in making sugar in Hawaii, but we've also got our hands in trying to make sugar using Cuba. So it kind of gives you the idea that maybe, even though we're claiming, and by we I mean the United States, maybe the United States is claiming to be imperializing because we're such good people and we want to spread our democracy and everything, but it sort of gives you the vibe that maybe we're not doing this for all the right reasons. Maybe we're doing this for some selfish reasons as well. Maybe we're doing this to make some money. And that idea is sort of reiterated with this cartoon here. As you can see, sort of up top, you've got the before picture and then the after picture in terms of all of these countries that we are, in real heavy air quotes here, we're helping them by coming and annexing them or taking control of their nation on behalf of the United States. Kind of like a ironic, look how terrible they had it before. Wow, look how great they have it now that the United States is intervening. Look how much money they have. Look how prosperous they are. They've got, obviously very different outfits on now that they've got some money. So thank goodness for the United States. We're trying to really hype ourselves up. Samoa and the Pacific. All of those islands that are sort of near Hawaii out in the Pacific Ocean that sort of lead us toward Asia, we are out there as well. This guy here, you'll probably hear his name again, Alfred Mahan. He is a big historian and Navy guy. He writes this book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And if you're thinking of the name Alfred Mahan, you've probably seen it already in your assignment, Imperialism, Yes or No. You should be able to tell that because he's a Navy guy, because he's a guy who really believes in the idea of power among nations, especially on the seas, he's a guy that's really going to be in favor of imperialism because he thinks if a country's going to be powerful, if a country's going to be successful, they've got to have a really successful navy to both defend their country and to sort of go out and promote trade and sort of be this big influence out on the seas. We're going to use the Pacific Islands, particularly Samoa and places like the Philippines. We're going to use these islands as what we're going to call stepping stones. We're going to use them as stepping stones to get to the one place where everybody is trying to trade. That place, of course, is China. Okay. So, like I mentioned a second ago, you see all these islands here, right? You see Samoa down here. You've got Midway, Wake, Guam, the Philippines. All of these islands here, under our idea of using them as stepping stones, we can sort of take all of the goods that we're going to export from the United States and just sort of use them as stepping stones, places that we can control, and also refuel our ships. Because, guys, remember, that's super important at this time, because the idea of trying to get a ship from here to here and then back on 1 or 2 tanks of gas, not exactly the easiest thing in the world. So having these places in the middle here is going to be a great way for us to use them as stepping stones to get to China. Because remember, China at this point in time in history, China doesn't have a whole lot in terms of goods. They did not modernize very quickly, so they're in a position where they have a lot of money and they're looking to buy things. We want to be the place that they're buying from. We talked about, before we went on this digital break here, we talked about spheres of influence. We talked about how you can see in this map here, based on all of these colors, prior to the United States getting involved, we have all these different colors here. You see the yellow, the orange, the purple, the red, the blue, the green. You got all of these places that are owned, these little pockets of China, they're owned by all of these other countries. That's because each of these countries, just like the United States, they want to take their goods and sell them in China because they know that China needs to buy all of this stuff. So when it comes time for us to actually get involved and say, hey, the United States wants to trade in China as well, how do we do that? This is where we use our Secretary of State, John Hay, to kind of make that change. This is John Hay here. He's got a glorious mustache, much cooler than a mustache I could ever grow. He realizes that China at this time is weak because at the time prior to this, they've had a lot of political problems, so they didn't really spend a whole lot of time making things and modernizing. So by the 1890s, all of these countries that we just saw on that last map, they've already got sort of a foothold in China, and the United States wants one. Like I mentioned before, by 1899, this guy, Secretary of State John Hay, he goes over and he basically sort of invites himself in and says, hey, what do you guys think about everybody having an opportunity to trade in China? What if we had what's called an open door policy? How do you guys feel about that? And basically, the leaders of all of these other nations said, well, yeah, that sounds okay, except not really. It doesn't seem great for us because it sounds like you're just trying to encroach on our policy to get in and trade. We're not super crazy about that idea. So John Hay basically returns to China. I'm sorry, he returns to the United States. He returns home, and he basically says to the U.S. government, well, I asked them what they thought about the open door policy. They all said it was cool, so we should definitely do it. And we sort of just invited ourselves in there. It didn't really appeal to all of these other countries, but we sort of just nudge our way into the door and make that happen. So when you hear this concept of an open door policy in China, I want you to think of Secretary of State John Hay, this guy. I want you to think of him basically coming in here and saying, well, we're going to trade in China too. I hope that's okay with you. Anyway, here we are. We can all trade together.